your podcast app. You'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet feather, sweet feather, talking trends and hierarchy. Sweet feather, sweet feather, relentless focus on their body. Sweet feather, sweet feather, what do they mean by all American? Sweet feather, sweet feather, no sex, just titillation. Memory, turn your face to the moonlight. Let your memory lead you. Open up, enter in.
Now,
Wonderful. Hello.
hello. I have had that song stuck in my head since I started reading Memories yesterday. And I have learned that I do not know but a single word of that song. Like, I basically just know the memory, da 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 moonlight, yada da 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 memory. Like, I don't know any of the words.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you know? Okay, here's the thought process I had. I was going to ask you, I mean, I obviously don't know one word of it either, except for memories and moonlight. But first I was going to be like, oh, do you have any sense of like, what is that song actually about? But then I was like, don't even say that, because from what I remember and understand, like Cats the musical I saw as a young child.
Okay.
I didn't see the movie. I've not seen it since then. Like, I don't know from Cats, but I am pretty sure that that musical has no plot.
Yes.
And so I am then pretty sure that that song has no like meaning. So I don't think we even need to Google it, because it literally is probably just about, it literally probably just says memories, moonlight, like carrots, peas, like it's like over and over. I
No.
feel like Cats, the whole thing is nothing.
Well, yeah, because Cats was the like T.S. Eliot collection of short stories. So it's just
Right.
about cats.
Just cats doing, they sit on a trash can, they say meow, they shake their little tail, that's the
Using
plot.
litter boxes, batting around catnip provocatively yet adorably.
I don't know if we want to reveal the kind of famous delta between the date of record and the date of release, but I mean, we would be remiss not to acknowledge it is January, it's around January 2nd, 2024, we could say. I mean, do we want to sort of talk, say a little?
Happy New Year's? Like, what are you looking for here?
No, the Mickey Mouse trademark has expired. Mickey Mouse is now public domain. And so we
Yes.
can now freely, while we've been up until this point showing admirable restraint, not using any of the Mickey Mouse IP, we absolutely now are going to go buck wild. And I'm going to talk in Mickey Mouse voice from now on.
Okay. I mean, this is now basically a Steamboat Willie fan cast, is what it is.
Oh my God, isn't that like Nazi? Do you know I taught a class on that? Do you know I was forced to teach a class on why, I literally was forced to teach a class on why Walt Disney wasn't a Nazi, even though everyone thinks he is. That literally was the class. I'm not kidding.
What, like a full semester or a single course session?
Can I actually do a really brief tangent on this? Because it would be therapeutically helpful for me to sort of expel some of my anger.
Can you just answer my question and
What?
then just therapize?
Yeah, what?
Was it a semester-long class, or was it
Yes. I was a TA, but I had to do a lot and like teach some classes and do recitation, and like it was a lot.
And the whole semester was focused on Walt Disney not being a Nazi?
Like on paper, no, but like basically yes. Like this is, let me just tell you,
Please.
when I was in grad school, right, anthropology, when we were TAing, the vibes was like it was a luck of the draw. So you basically like got assigned a course to TA, and it was sort of understood that everyone's kind of like in good faith, like gonna teach whatever you're supposed to teach in the spirit of the 4 fields department, right? So you might be so the 4 fields was archaeology, biological, anthro, linguistic, anthro, Robert Singh, of course, and the other one cultural. And so it would be in sort of bad taste, for example, for me, when I got assigned archaeology, to be like, I don't want to do this, because you're supposed to be learning everything and be able to teach it all, right? So for example, when I was assigned archaeology course, I did teach it. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life. And on the TA review, one of them did write under the question, what could this TA do better? They did write know more about archaeology. And I said, absolutely fair enough. But one semester, I got to finally teach something I actually like was normal. And then someone in my class who I was very mad at the time, but now is a very good friend, so I'm not gonna actually call him out, did something very rude, which was secretly got them to give him the good class and gave me the fucking this Mickey Mouse class, okay? The class supposedly was like about Disney. I don't know why I was in this department. It really should have been communications, not to be rude, but so the point is I show up, literally the class was half this woman doing slideshows of her family at Disney and like all of her merch. I'm not even kidding. And the other half of the class was being like, Walt Disney really wasn't a Nazi, and like your parents are lying to you, and like let's all our essays are about like why Walt Disney isn't a Nazi, like debunking. I was like, this is interesting, and I'm literally sitting there. There's like hundreds of kids in this class because it obviously sounds like the easiest, stupidest class ever, which it was, and I had a point. Anyhow, Steamboat Willie, I don't know.
Cool, great, good and great. This feels both timely and topical, but also like kind of ageless and could live forever.
One thing that I obviously will cut, but being real for a second, this book, there's a lot of bereavement.
Yes.
You are famously actively grieving.
Very actively grieving, crying almost every day.
So I want to be sensitive to that. Do you, we have as many options as there are stars in the sky as far as how we want to handle or not handle it. How do you feel?
I feel fine. I will say, and you must cut this, there are several places in my notes where I say things like, I should ask Pardo about this, or I'm glad I'm talking to Pardo about this, about the book. And you must cut that because it is kind to you.
I was fully waiting for the punchline. I'm
No,
like,
that was
what?
the
And then it said like, so she can freaking eat my shorts because
eat my shorts, indeed. No, I feel okay. I feel open to talking about this.
all right.
And spoiler alert, I do feel like the incredibly stupid and binary way that they talk about grieving and memories and death was actually helpful, because I was like, well, what they're saying is stupid, so I should be thinking other things.
Totally. I love that. 6-word review.
Can I give you a peek behind the curtain? Because for the first time ever, I have pre-planned my 6-word review, and that is not because I'm a cheater pumpkin eater. It is not because I'm a bad person. It's because I made a note about the book globally, and I was like, oh, that's 6 words.
I don't object to us doing it in advance. Like, I think if we're struck with genius, as we so often are, like, it would be rude to our audience to like withhold that.
Well, here we go. You ready? Get those 6 fingers up. Women are not men's rehabilitation centers. And I just wrote that down in my notes and was like, oh, that's 6 words.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
It's true.
Gorgeous.
Women are not here to rehabilitate men. Do your own work, men. May I please have your 6-word review?
Okay. Kara, also grieving. No one asks.
Yes. Very much in the spirit of women are not rehabilitation centers. Yes.
Like, by the way,
Yeah.
her dad up and left her.
And took her little brother.
I have a quote could kick us off. Or in grief, nothing stays put. One keeps on emerging from a phase, but it always recurs, round and round, everything repeats. Am I going in circles, or dare I hope I am on a spiral? And that's from, do you want to guess?
No. I mean, is it something I could guess, or is it like one of your bereavement books that you read that I've never heard of?
Honestly, kind of literally both. It is like a random bereavement thing, but it's also something like someone who you do know in terms of they are a famous author, and you'd be like, they wrote this? That's how I said. I said, what? They're famous for very big other thing, has nothing to do with this.
Oh, I hope it's not J.K. Rowling.
Oh my God, no, but like you're in the right.
George R.R. Martin?
I think more our childhood.
Madeleine L'Engle?
I think more like It's a nice movie. It's a nice book. There's lots. It's a whole world. It's a whole universe.
C.S. Lewis?
Yes. So apparently, okay, first of all, bravo.
Thank you.
Second of all, C.S. Lewis wrote this thing called A Grief Observed. I don't know. Okay. Should we do basically cliffhanger?
So we just finished book 23, which was Say Goodbye. And at the end of book 23, Liz and Jess's older brother, Stephen, who's away at college, but not very far away and comes home all the time, who has been grieving the death of his high school girlfriend, Trisha Martin, has finally opened up to love and is interested again in Cara Walker, a young woman whom Jess has tried to set him up with several times, unsuccessfully, but suddenly Cara has experienced some sadness in her life, and so therefore Stephen is now interested in her.
He says like, oh, she's really like matured. She's like serious now. She's not just a frivolous, like silly, gossipy little girl.
But it's really just that she's sad. And so Stephen and Cara are dancing at Lila Fowler's party, and Betsy Martin, Trisha Martin's older sister, comes upon them and like screams at them. And at the end of Say Goodbye, Elizabeth and Jessica are discussing that night, the night before. Poor Stephen. It had been months since Trisha's death, and Elizabeth understood now how vital it was for her brother to begin to pick up the pieces of his life. He just couldn't go on forever remembering the past, she thought, her heart aching for her brother. Sooner or later, he had to take a deep breath and begin to look forward again. And from what Lila reported, it sounded as though Stephen had made a tentative move in that direction that night. But Betsy Martin had made certain his guilt would snuff out the first sparks of interest he felt for Cara Walker. Will Betsy Martin stand in the way of Stephen and Cara's happiness? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 24, Memories.
Should we do plot summary?
I mean, my mind just like literally went blank. I'm like, what happens in this book? So the A plot is
I could tell you.
Stephen and Cara try to date and keep getting thwarted by Betsy Martin. And Stephen is spending way more time with Betsy Martin, like reminiscing about Trisha. And he keeps like going on dates with Cara and then standing her up or leaving abruptly. And then at the end of the book, they kind of work it out.
Yeah, Betsy's role in this, I think, is pretty big because it's like she's also actively guilting him of dating someone else and like actively telling him that to date someone else or to quote unquote move on, reinforce the idea that that would be like a betrayal to the memory of Trisha.
And then Liz talks to Betsy and kind of says, let Stephen be free. Trisha never even really wanted Stephen to mourn her in the first place. And so what you're doing is against Trisha's wishes.
Yeah. So yeah, Liz intervenes and then Betsy's like, okay. And then Betsy kind of basically gets them together and then they're all happy. And then the B plot is that like, while Stephen is reckoning with how to quote unquote move on and deal with his grief of Trisha, Elizabeth is grappling with her grief of losing Todd and she notices a sort of ghostly apparition around town and she thinks is a Todd and she's stunned to find that there exists in the flesh similarly built brown-haired, lean, and you guessed it, coffee-colored eyed, sexy hot guy. His name is Michael Sellers, and she decides that he's going to be Todd. She goes on a few dates with him and realizes that he's an idiot, and then realizes she kind of needs some time on her own. She doesn't necessarily need to jump into something else so quickly. And that's kind of where she finds herself in the end.
The A plot and the B plot work really well together. Unfortunately, they are both pretty boring.
Yeah. There's not really any hijinks. The only sort of fun thing we get is a volleyball game. So we get to hear them talk about volleyball. Oh, you didn't like that?
I mean, I like,
It was funny.
Francine's,
It was funny.
her writing sparkles when she writes about sport, of course. It was funny. It was fine. It was another one of those like charity, the whole school comes out kind of situations.
And you better believe there's a dance after.
Oh, of course. At a totally new venue that they just kind of drop as if it's nothing.
The Caravan?
Have we ever heard of the Caravan before? I have not.
I don't know her.
Yeah, what?
Who? Can I tell you just my sort of perception of this one, just
Yeah.
of like where does it sit in my sort of mental map?
Mhm.
This one and Promises were always just vague for me in terms of like I can't remember what they are. They're sort of the same plot. The titles are sort of
Mhm.
interchangeable.
Mhm.
This book doesn't need to happen, I feel, in the sense that like you feel like you already read it in Promises. At least for me, this is Promises. It's like I don't know that this needed to be another book, but on the other hand, I really like the sort of like repetitive nature of that because it reinforces the repetitive nature of grief. I'm sorry, but grief is not going to fit within our usual story arcs that we like to move on from things. And, grief is going to hit us in waves. And if that means a second book that is very, very, very similar, we are going to go through that same pain.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think what the title Memories is really about is our memories of the book Promises. Okay. So, no, but I really did enjoy I think, in previous books, When Love Dies, Say Goodbye, we've talked about like the parallels between grief of a relationship ending and grief of losing someone dying, like bereavement. And this book, I don't know, I felt like was an interesting next step in that conversation and showing like Elizabeth's arc and her experiences.
Can I trouble you to show me the cover?
Wait, first you want to guess the taglines?
Um, will Stephen forever live in the past?
Great guess.
Is Stephen trapped in the past?
No,
Nothing even close.
just try other
Is
people.
love
Try
ever
other,
truly gone?
like
What
who
does it
is
mean
Steve?
to remember?
Okay, like you're circling around it. You're there. But it's extremely ideological. It's extremely loaded, and it makes me angry. And wait till you see the cover because the cover made me mad. It's And at some point, are we going to acknowledge what we have yet to explicitly address, but I think everyone's been thinking about the fact that we do pronounce Kara's name differently.
Yeah, so I am open to that conversation whenever you're ready for it.
So I'm not willing to change how I pronounce it.
I'm also unwilling to change how I pronounce it. So I guess here we are.
Great, great.
Great.
Okay.
Got
The
that.
tagline is, can Kara make Stephen forget Trisha Martin? And Robert is having a jaw to the floor.
And their middle finger is raised. How effing dare you? People don't make people forget things. Stephen has agency, and women are not rehabilitation centers. Do your own work, Stephen. That makes me angry in a way that I don't feel comfortable expressing.
Thank you, and I'd love to build. What really
Please.
pisses me off about this is like a lot of people in this book, Jessica, eventually to some extent Elizabeth, certainly Ned, are pushing the belief and the idea that number one, Stephen's grief is somehow pathological or there's something wrong with it. It needs to be somehow his acceptance or his quote unquote moving on needs to be accelerated in some way. Also, there's a lot of this equating of moving on with someone else. So it's like, it's this question of like, is he gonna remember Trisha or is he gonna date other people? It's always this like binary of things that like absolutely are not mutually exclusive. But so there's like a few layers here, right? Like, and I think why Memories is an interesting title is that the book presents the problem as memories. Memories is the challenge. Memories is the thing we have to tackle, right? Stephen must let go of memories in order to move on. This is constant. And by the way, we talked about this in Say Goodbye, right? When Liz is like, well, I'm just going to forget Todd because he's not here. Most of the characters in this book at some point posit that framing of like, Ned says you have to let go of Trisha's memory, all this type of stuff, right? And I think it's really sad that everyone around them, and it makes sense because this is sort of more the thinking at the time around bereavement, but the idea that like he can't do both at once. Like he can't continue to hold and grieve and honor Trisha's memory and find ways to sort of restore things in his life. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that whatever you think about that, the question of what does moving on look like?
Yeah.
And the idea that like it has to mean dating someone, it's like it's crazy. And it's interesting, I think, that at the end of this book, like Elizabeth goes on a similar journey, right? Where she's like, well, to get over Todd, like first she was like, to get over Todd, let me be with Nicholas. And then she's like, to get over Todd, let me be with this Michael fake Todd guy, right? And then at the end, she like lies on her bed and she's like, and she tells Enid, like, well, I'm just gonna take some time to myself, which is a great thing for her to come to. And it's interesting that Stephen never really considers that option.
Nope.
But so when it says, can Kara make Stephen forget Trisha Martin? I think it's especially egregious because Kara's the only one, like everyone in the book seems to have this idea that quote unquote making him forget Trisha Martin is the desired thing and there should be such an intervention. Whereas Kara's the only one who's actually opposed to it and says, guys, let him take his time. She's the only one who's not trying to quote unquote make him forget Trisha Martin. And so it could have even said, so because of that, it could have even said, can Kara help Stephen forget Trisha Martin? Because from the ideology of the book, that's actually desired. And they're also making it like she's the one doing that, even though she's the only one saying, guys, we don't have to do that. Okay.
Can I overread one thing? We get, can Kara make Stephen forget Trisha Martin? Which is interesting to me because it's Kara, first name only, Stephen, first name only, Trisha Martin, first and last name. And in my mind, it actually, my first thought was like, oh, that means Trisha's more important. But actually, upon further introspection, I think what it's really showing is that Trisha's memory is slipping away. Because if we remembered her, we could just say Trisha. But if it's like the book is worried we're going to say Trisha and then we're like, which Trisha? Trisha Martin. So it like lays it out for us as if she's already kind of starting to fade away and using her first and last name as like a desperate way to cling to her.
That's so interesting. My thought was that it implies a formality or like dead people are sort of, she's preserved. It's sort of Dear Sister vibes of like, she's in the frame now.
Yeah.
In terms of like, there's a moment in the book that was very interesting when Kara says to Stephen, kind of in a final moment of exasperation and release, like she's like, I can't compete with a ghost. And she says, you're clearly not ready for this yet. And he's like, yeah, okay, you're right, I'm not. And so this idea of like her being a first name, but Trisha Martin always being a last name, it's very like she's immortalized in that way.
I love that. I think that's very useful.
You want to see the cover?
Well, is the back tagline just like,
oh, sorry,
memories persist, ...
Gorgeous. No.
Okay. The ghost remains ...
Stunning. No.
Haunted by love ...
Okay, not exactly, but one word wrong.
No. Oh my God, wait.
It's
Haunted
something by love ...
Is it the same vibe as Haunted?
Like it's not spooky, but yeah. It's blank by love. Well, now
Held back by love?
I think a little more violent.
Thrashed violently by love? No, what is it? Just tell me.
Torn apart by love.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good.
Torn apart by love. That one got me. I said this one, this is a smart one. This is one of these smart ones. You know, torn apart by love. My first reaction is like, it seems a paradox, right? Pain or hatred should tear you apart. Love should bring you together or make you feel whole or happy and good, right? So to be torn apart by love seems a paradox. And yet, of course, that is what grief is. Grief is being torn apart by love. But also, they're each in their configurations to each other being torn apart by their love for others. So Stephen, in his relationship with Kara, they are torn apart and he is torn apart by his love for Trisha. But also Stephen feels that in his relationship with Trisha, he's being torn apart and guilty and all this because of his love now for Kara, right? And so he's in a way feeling torn up and torn from each one of them because of his relation to the other. And then Kara, who is barely, again, made visible, but she's being torn apart by Stephen's love for Trisha, but of course also by her parents' divorce and by everything that's gone on and her family being split. And I think also we must remember the line in, I believe it was Kidnapped, when Jessica was being so kind of cavalier and saying to Kara, I think they were driving to the Moros, she was saying to her, well, someone's going to have to help Stephen pick up the pieces when Trisha dies, and why shouldn't it be you? And you can be his comfort. And Kara at the time said something like, well, I wouldn't be a grave robber.
Yes. Oh,
and we
can't forget that.
And we said, oh, it's weird that, like, is it Is it kind of weird that she would sort of have that idea that that would be that, and like she would see that as like a betrayal to Trisha or stealing from Trisha? And so I think, yeah, she's also experienced probably lots of being torn up that is not necessarily getting attention in this book.
Can I see the cover? Stephen Wakefield is hot. Is that my 6-word summary of this book?
I think he's so repulsive.
So Stephen is wearing kind of a pink button down. He has his face downturned. He's a very chiseled jaw and brown hair. He is looking kind of sadly down. Kara is looking at him, touching his chest. She is wearing, I believe, a black and white striped sweater. And she looks kind of sad but blank. Her mouth is open. She looks a little beseeching. She's clearly reaching out to him. He is looking away from her and is looking down and sad, as if to tell us, I don't want this, Kara. And as if Kara is pursuing him, which is just absolutely not what happens in the book at all.
This is disgusting. Okay.
It's violence, is what it is. It's violence.
She doesn't even pursue him at all. Like literally, he just goes after her. All he does is go after her and then like embarrass her in the middle of dance floors at parties. He does that like once a week. And then it's like, can she claw her way in? Can she make him forget? Fuck it all. This is so ideological. This is so rude. And by the way,
yes,
I find that her lip is sort of curled up in so much of a snarl. Just the slightest little snarl. Can you see?
I can.
It's sort of doing like this. Look. You know what I mean?
I do. That may be that she's smiling and it's at an angle because she's kind of 3/4.
No, because the bottom of her mouth turned down.
That's true.
Smile.
You do a very good snarl.
Thanks.
It's like Elvis,
so I thought that was
angry and sexy.
Yeah, I thought that was a little bit rude. I didn't love that.
So chapter 1 opens and we are dealing with the kind of fallout of last night, which was Stephen dancing with Kara, Betsy breaking it up. And there's this idea that Ned posits first, and obviously we know that Ned is potentially the worst parent on the planet, thinking Steve has been so much better lately. I was sure he was beginning to let go of Trisha's memory. I hope that's not the problem. Where there's this idea posited very early on that what it means to be healthy and successful is to let go of the memory of a loved one you have lost, which obviously is truly, truly, truly ridiculous. It's interesting because Stephen is described as being in a depression. It says lately he had begun to recover from his depression, though Trisha was always in his thoughts. And it's interesting. This was the first moment where I was like, I wonder what Pardo makes of this, because I think there's a line between grief and depression and like kind of appropriate and uncomplicated and expected and typical grieving that you wouldn't label as depression. Like you would label as like, okay, yes, you're sad, Stephen. Like your girlfriend passed away. This is hard for you. And it's interesting that the text kind of calls our attention to Stephen's depression. It even says, in spite of his family's love and support, Stephen had mourned for weeks following Trisha's death, as if mourning for Trisha was something he shouldn't do, and as if it were something that like love and support should keep you from doing, rather than something that love and support would like help you do appropriately or healthily. It was all really interesting because it does feel like the book wants us to agree that Stephen should just like be fine. And being fine is forgetting Trisha and ignoring all feelings.
Yeah, I think the way that they're using depression there, I think what it's intended to mean is just like, yeah, an intense short period of depression, basically, that is part of his grief. And yeah, I think this is all reinforcing. Like, it's so interesting. It says he had mourned for weeks in spite of their love and support. It's like weeks is not a long time.
Right.
And some things I have learned about grief is there is no timeline. That doesn't mean that people can't be able to build productive, healthy, like reasonably happy lives around that grief. We, of course, live in a death-denying society.
Mm-hmm.
We like to deny death. We like to avoid death. And we like to, as described in this book, think that, grief is something bad and you should just kind of get over it and move on as fast as possible. Grief is not bad. Grief is a normal and healthy way of processing loss. It may be worth, I think, really briefly talking about a couple of models of grief.
Sure.
Okay, so Kubler-Ross, right? Everyone likes to talk about it. We have the famous denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The fundamental misunderstanding of, and the sort of issue of how the research, her stuff has been applied, is that what she was actually looking at with this 5 stages is terminally ill people after a diagnosis facing their own death, working through to accept their own mortality. This has been applied to bereavement in general, and that is not accurate. It's not true to losing someone when a loved one dies. In reality, as we have discussed previously in Heartbreaker and other books, it's much messier, it's not linear, it's the waves and everything else. So some alternatives that can help us understand bereavement. One of the interesting models that we could talk about is this like dual process model that says that people oscillate between, and this is from Strobe and Schutt, 1999. They say most people, the way that they grieve is experiencing a back and forth between, they call it loss-oriented and restoration-oriented responses. And that most people end up sort of naturally balancing these out. And that it's actually, and that's why people often feel like they're on a roller coaster with grief. And one day I feel fine and the next day it hits me. That's really normal. And this is a way of processing that actually helps people cope and like survive. And it's not something that for the most part needs to be sort of regulated. And so a lot of times when people experience guilt around, for example, I had a good day and I was happy and I had fun, the sort of general wisdom that I've been learning is like, take each of those moments for what it is, right? And when you can have a good day, enjoy it. And when you have a crying in bed day, cry in bed. And that's the sort of back and forth that is normal, even though it can feel really crazy, because it's a balance between facing the reality of the loss, which is sad and painful, and doing things to re-engage with our life, which can be just taking steps to do things or having our thoughts be occupied by other things that are going to stimulate our mind in different ways and our feelings or whatever, right? But it's a sort of back and forth. So for example, like loss-oriented responses is like a lot of the stuff that Stephen and Betsy are doing, crying together, grieving together, thinking about the loved one, and the sort of going in the covers and crying and wanting to sort of isolate and that type of stuff. Restoration-oriented responses could be tactical things you need to do to practically move forward in your life. If you need to take on a new role that your loved one had, or learn a skill, or do some administrative thing, and just day-to-day tasks that sort of make your life be moving along kind of thing.
So could we think of Betsy as a metaphor for loss-related and Kara as a metaphor for restorative-related grieving? And could we say perhaps Francine invented this model and is showing kind of the roller coasters and the oscillation through these things?
Absolutely. The only thing that I think is dangerous about that is that the restoration shouldn't have to be another person.
Of course.
It would be great, like, for example, because what I wanted to be telling Stephen was, you don't have to stop doing this stuff with Betsy. It's nice that you and Betsy want to sit in a park and share your memories of Trisha. That's beautiful. Continue to do that as long as you feel you want to do that. But you do not need to feel guilty about also doing other things and not always being in that mode, right? Because for him to be not going to any of his classes, never doing anything with any people, being sort of in this hole, right? That's tough. And so it doesn't mean it needs to be rushed. It absolutely does not mean he needs to run out and start dating or go to parties or whatever. You know, he can, if he's experiencing a lot in this loss-oriented mode, that's normal. This was his close girlfriend. It was his probably first serious relationship. And he really cared for her. And she was a huge part of his life. Like, this is a big, big loss.
It's interesting the way that the time spent with Betsy is framed as being inherently bad. When, you know, as you're kind of eloquently putting out, it's just like part of grief and could be part of it.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's because of the sort of binary views that we get. Like, this book is basically telling us that you can't grieve and restore at the same time. And so that's why the dual process model is cool, because it shows us you can do both those things at the same time, you know? I think about 10% of bereaved people experience complicated grief. So when we say complicated grief, colloquially, we may mean something like the person had a complicated relationship with a parent, or it's that grief. But I think, like, clinically, what complicated grief means is that it's is that this loss-oriented stage that is acutely painful is extremely intense and lasts for, I don't know how long would be expected, but longer than expected in the sense that the person is debilitated in a long-term way, that would be the kind of thing that would be, I think, where you're talking to a therapist if you're not already talking to a grief therapist. So that, is something a bit extra, but I don't think Stephen is anywhere near that. And then here's the model that I say, I love this model. Lois Tonkin, 1996. It's the idea of growing around grief. A lot of times, like how we think grief should go, and how this book I think is positing it should go, is that, okay, picture grief as a ball of yarn, okay? And our life is like the jar that the ball of yarn is in, okay? We might think that as time goes on, that ball of yarn is going to shrink. Over time, the grief of the loss of that person will get smaller. Lois Tonkin says no. That ball of yarn stays exactly the same size, but other stuff grows around it. The grief stays the same, but we begin to rebuild our lives to have other things around it. Sometimes it's still going to bump up against the sides, Again, it's not linear. It doesn't mean it's going to be insulated or whatever. The painful feelings remain present, but through new experiences, meeting others, pursuit of new activities, doing things, you can achieve enjoyment and have growth around it. I really love that model. That's it.
Okay, I love that. I think it's very helpful to think about the ball of yarn.
Page 2.
I think page 2, Stephen is very upset about what he's done. Lying in the dark, he could see that Betsy had been right. Why should he be out enjoying himself when his beloved Trisha was gone? Tears welled up in Stephen's eyes, and he turned his face towards the wall. I may have betrayed Trisha's memory once, but I will never, ever do it again. And it just sets up the internal logic of this book, which is that it is a betrayal to Trisha's memory to do anything fun. And I just wish that Stephen had some kind of thought partner who wasn't, I guess, in his immediate family who doesn't understand anything, but just like even a same age peer who could talk to him and be like, wait, sorry, so based on that, then when you're 30, is it a betrayal to her memory to have fun? Like, what is your long-term plan here? But he doesn't have anybody who can do that. He just has people who say, either just forget about her, you don't need to do anything for her memory, she doesn't matter anymore. Or people like Betsy who are like, let's steep ourselves constantly in this memory to the point where we don't do anything else. And I just wish there were like one normal character in this book who were like, hey, Stephen, it seems like you're going through something hard. Do you want to talk about it? And like actually just talk to him.
I mean, paradoxically, that person is Kara. If he would just, I think a great outcome would have been for him to decide to be friends with her, because she's the one who I think is having that a little bit more perspective of like, let him do this in his own time, support what he says he needs kind of thing. So that could have been an interesting alternative.
But famously, relationships only matter if they're romantic. So him being friends with Kara is not interesting enough to hold a book around.
Really uncomfortable moment when
what do you mean? Nothing was uncomfortable here.
Well, unfortunately, during the morning shuffle, they're all talking about Stephen's so sad, and Jessica says, okay, I'm gonna go try to get him to come downstairs. Mrs. Wakefield says, I suppose you could give it a try. Don't worry, Mom, I'll get him down. He won't be able to resist me. No man can. And then she gives the group a wink and flounces out of the room.
Truly, like, who are they writing these books for? Like,
Perverts.
There's no other way to read that, right?
Perverts. Stephen comes downstairs, but it turns out he just is going to be hanging out with Betsy, who joins them for breakfast. Jessica's mad because Betsy made her eggs cold.
Weirdly, I think...
did you clock that it explicitly said this time that the OJ was fresh squeezed?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Did I clock it? Of course. There was no mixing. There was no spoon in the pitcher. Fresh squeezed OJ.
So does that make us then rethink our interpretations from last time? Which, remember, I did posit that she was stirring pulp?
No. I think your positing is still, unfortunately, inaccurate. One thing I thought was really weird about this whole thing.
Wait, we forgot the actual B plot. In the summary, I said the B plot was Liz and Todd. The B plot is Jessica and Winston's dad.
Ugh, this is so
It's nothing.
boring.
It's nothing. Jessica thinks Winston's dad's a film actor. That's the hijinks of this one.
It's not Winston's dad though.
Sorry, Winston's
It's like his cousin or his uncle.
whatever. Yeah.
It's so
Uncle.
boring. It's a whole, as they say, nothing burger.
Whatever, we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
One thing that I think is a little weird is that Betsy comes to the door and Jessica isn't warm to her, but she's not rude. And Elizabeth is like,
Elizabeth is like going nuts.
yeah. She's like treating it as if Jessica,
Yes.
she's growing furious with her sister. She's like so upset. And it's like, wait, are you in the same scene that I'm in, Elizabeth? Because Jessica's doing nothing. Liz's B plot is that, as we talked about, there's that charity volleyball game. There's the first big dance at the caravan after, and Liz is stressed out because this is the first big school event since Todd had left Sweet Valley, and
she has to brush up on her serve.
Well, she does have to brush up on her serve, but she's worried about the dance and
Yeah,
what she's going to serve at the dance.
Exactly. Certainly not Luke's.
Certainly not Luke's. She doesn't want to go alone, but she also doesn't know if she should get a date. It's kind of like, who cares?
It is kind of who cares.
Stephen and Betsy go for a walk, and we immediately understand that Betsy does have a boyfriend. Betsy's boyfriend, Jason, is off teaching, which is why Betsy's available at this time. It just seems like another glaring moment where it's like Betsy is allowed to have love and fun, and Todd is, sorry, not Todd, geez, my mind's gay right now, sorry. Stephen is supposed to just like put his life on hold for basically ever. Betsy tries to apologize for how wild she was and how out of pocket she was last night. And Stephen basically doesn't let her apologize. He's like, no, you were right. Carl Walker is a nice girl, but she'll never take Trisha's place. He like appreciates that she's beating up on him for it's very messed up.
And then she says, I was so worried. I thought you were forgetting Trisha. Trisha can live on, but only as long as we remember her.
It just seems like they're putting so much pressure on themselves to always and forever be thinking of Trisha and having her memory be the foremost and only thing in their mind, which is just, I think, not a way that you can live long term. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, like they're trying to live, like we said, it's like they want to stay in the loss-oriented phase, and they want to sort of intentionally restrict and like discipline that sort of like, instead of just letting it come as it comes, because they're worried that that won't be good enough. And that if they just sort of let it come as it comes, they're going to forget her, which is really sad. I feel for them, but I think it's not helpful. Oh.
Jessica overhears her mom talking to Sharon, who is Winston Egbert's mom, about her famous director coming into town.
Her brother, I think. And Jessica gets excited because a few pages ago, she told the Wakefield family her latest career announcement was she wants to be a film actor. She's too big for the stage or something like this.
Yeah.
You know, so she starts thinking, how can she get in with that? Then we get a scene at the mall.
I love the mall.
Yeah, and a couple of notable things here. First of all, Liz and Enid are trying on dresses at the designer shop.
Yeah,
I wrote, okay, money bags.
Yeah, what happened to Lizette's? What happened to Foxy Mama's?
Thank you. And C, I don't see Liz having a part-time job.
No.
Where's all this disposable? Like, are you kidding?
Oh, you know Ned and Alice just give it to her because she's the good daughter.
She'll use it responsibly. She probably has a separate credit card that like
no. That's too far.
Also, we're introduced to a new food institution, huge. Howard's Deli. I'm like, Jewish? Howard plus Deli equals Jewish to me. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. And is it okay to say I love a deli?
Is that our first Jew?
This is not a confirmed Jew, but this is our first even Jew adjacent person, I think.
Well,
listeners, please know that Pardo and I are both Jewish. So as we're doing this kind of calling out who's a Jew and who's not a Jew, we are not doing it in any kind of anti-Semitic way. Please
let me tell you something.
That.
In Kidnapped, I cut, or in the one before that, when Carl comes, I cut out when I said I think it's anti-Semitic because he had like a hawkish nose. And I'm like, okay, I'm just being crazy. So I cut out that whole thing. But then Laura Sipp told me that when she listened to it, she was like, is he supposed to be Jewish? She thought the same exact thing. So Howard's Deli might be also Jewish. I mean, I think Howard's Deli is Jewish. Otherwise, they're being very appropriative.
I mean, famously, my father's name. What is it? Say it.
Deli?
It's Howard, but he goes by Hank.
Okay, then, as if the parallels weren't clear enough, again, we get a ghostly apparition at the mall. In Say Goodbye, we had Todd appearing as a ghostly apparition on the lawn of the party. And now we get Liz has seen a ghost, and it's someone who looks just like Todd, and she leads Enid on a wild goose chase through the mall, but they never find him. And she's like, well, I guess I imagined it. Then we're back with the morning shuffle at the Wakefield.
Again, Steve is clearly having a hard time, and everybody's just kind of like, oh, okay. Like last morning shuffle, he wouldn't come down. Now he's like, quote unquote, just in a hurry, but he doesn't look like he's in a hurry. Jessica has clocked that stuff is wrong with Steven. She says, you don't seem like you're in a hurry. Where were you all day yesterday? And she's like trying to help her brother who's clearly depressed. And Elizabeth goes, let's drop it, Jess. Sensing a storm brewing. We've got to get going. She has the audacity to be like, Jess, keep it moving. Don't help your brother who's going through something. Meanwhile, she is the one who is not yet ready to go. She is not yet dressed. It's just classic Liz hypocrisy.
Lizpocracy. Let's keep it moving. Where are we? Jessica's plotting how she's gonna kind of needle her way into the Egberts and get close to Winston. And she thinks she's gonna get Winston to go with her to the dance. Then we get introduced to the setup for the next book. Or the one that comes after the next super edition. The next normal edition one, which is Nowhere to Run, is 2 books from now, because after this we got Special Christmas. So now we're getting introduced to the storyline that is setting up for that, which is Emily and the 2 Karens.
I love the 2 Karens. It's so funny to me.
It's really funny that they're both called Karen. Go ahead.
Emily is in there. She's one of the members of Sweet Valley High's popular band, The Droids. She's very sad. She's very tired. Karen is up all night crying. And then Jessica goes, wait, is your stepmother upset about something? Not that Karen. Her new baby sister is named Karen too. I like that. 2 Karens.
The fact that Jessica knows what a random girl from the Droids' stepmother's name is, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
That means she's listening when people talk. Because that girl's not her good friend. She's just a random
good friend.
Like, to know her stepmother's name is Karen?
Not to get us lost in this, is Emily the one who was in the chemistry test shenanigans?
Mm-hmm. Good memory.
Mr. Collins is setting up this incredibly stupid project. Their term project is everybody is picking an American author they'd like to study. No parameters, anything other than American author. And the way he does it is we're going to go around the room. Everyone is going to say the author they're interested in. If someone says an author you're interested in, raise your hand, and you can both be using that, working on that author. This is such bad, lazy, stupid teaching. And it's like, Collins, maybe you shouldn't be so perched on the edge of your desk. Maybe you should be behind the desk, like writing some effing
with
lesson
a paper
plans.
and a pencil.
Like, hello?
May I say something, please?
Speak freely.
We have been consistently befuddled at why Collins continues to give Liz these administrative leadership roles when she has demonstrated poor organization skills. And we mustn't forget during the talent show and Say Goodbye, when she felt that the most efficient way to get people to sign up for a talent show rather than passing around a sheet of paper was to hold 2 meetings, 2, I believe, at least hour-long meetings, and get everyone to basically have a long conversation about it. Okay. And so this is now tracking because Collins is in a leadership role and, she looks up to him as a role model. So she's probably modeled her leadership and organizational skills after him. And this is why she's so bad at what she does. So Winston picks Hemingway and then Jess picks Hemingway so she can work with Winston.
It is
Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald? Sorry.
Yeah. And we only see 2 different people's choices, but they're Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. So it's like, cool, just pick old white dead men. Cool.
Yeah, no, it would have been a pleasant surprise yeah.
I do think there's this like tiny funny thing that Lila picks Ernest Hemingway because he's Mariel Hemingway's grandfather. I thought it was like kind of a funny little aside.
Who's Mariel Hemingway?
She's a blonde woman and she was a model, and I think she was also potentially an actress.
That's fine. Then Elizabeth gets another glimpse of fake Todd.
So Liz sees this Todd lookalike in the hallway And it's like, what's going on? And then becomes increasingly driven to figure out who this person is. And I just wrote in my notes, like, why is she so obsessed with finding out who this Todd lookalike is? If I had a boyfriend slash ex-boyfriend slash fuzzy situation, I would try and find a guy who didn't remind me of him. Why would you be searching for a guy who does remind you of him?
Because she's not accepting it. Like she thinks she can replace Todd.
I think
It's
that is
not
true.
good.
It's not good.
Like, have you ever like dated someone who looked like someone else? I don't know. All my boyfriends have been, and girlfriends, have been identical sextuplets. Yeah, now we get conversation of Jessica and Kara. And Jessica's like, you missed your golden opportunity with Steve the other night. Couldn't you keep his mind off Trisha? And Kara softly says, yeah, we were having a nice time. But then Betsy came along and started being abusive.
Which is accurate. Betsy was absolutely being abusive. Say it, Kara, say it.
Yeah. And then Jessica's like, well, I think it's unhealthy how much time they spent with each other. But Kara, in a caring voice, says, don't be too hard on him. I know how it is when you miss someone.
I think you'll find it's Kara in a carring voice.
Jessica says, I'm sorry about Trisha, but
But
Steve's
you
got to
didn't think
start
that was funny at all?
living again. And Kara's like, but Steve's got to do what he thinks is best. Kara's so understanding. I love her. She's the only one who gets it.
Yeah, she like is actually showing empathy and being mature.
Then we get a call with Liz and Todd. And like until now, they've sort of had this little illusion that like they can kind of keep this going and like make it work, whatever, their whole like ethical non-monog lifestyle. But then Todd has excitement in his voice and tells Liz about this girl, Gina, who's having a party next weekend at her family's cabin in the mountains, and she invited me today. And Liz is like, oh, sounds good, but she feels like a cold hand is squeezing her heart. I felt that. And then Todd is like filling her in on his new life. And the longer he talked, the sadder she became. Like she wanted him to be happy, but she also was worried he was doing it with such ease.
And I totally get Todd's perspective. Like from a casual reader be like, oh, it's so cruel that he's talking about this new girl with Liz. But to Todd, a homosexual, this girl is just like a fun gal pal. Gina is just a gal that he's going to like probably do his nails with and like kind of do some kind of face masks and stuff at her cabin. And so he thinks nothing of mentioning it, of course, because he sees her not as a sexual being, but just as like a fun party time. And poor Liz is stuck there kind of with a broken heart.
Okay. Chapter 5, Winston is absolutely juggling fruit.
Absolutely.
Lest a book go by that we don't see him interacting inappropriately with some sort of food item.
Luckily, he takes a last gulp of milk, but he just drinks the milk. He doesn't like flick it at anyone or spit it in anyone's face. So I was like, oh, there's a win.
And then we get a little moment where Jessica is sort of trying to flirt with Winston and get him to ask her to the dance. And she's expecting that it's going to be like, he's going to be so delighted and this is his big dream. And it's like, this is going to be like the easiest thing in the world. But then it does not work as she expected. She's like, so who are you going with? And he's like, oh, no one yet. And she's like, I'm sure there's plenty of girls that would want to go with you. And he's like, got anyone in mind? She pushes the hair out of her eyes with a languid motion. Let me put it like this. What would you think about going to the dance with a terrific aqua-eyed blonde? And Wednesday goes, oh, you've been thinking about that too. And she's like, yes, it's a great idea. And he's like, yeah, me too. That's why I asked Elizabeth to go with me last period. And she's like,
so Winston asks Elizabeth because he's worried that she might feel lonely with Todd gone.
So thoughtful.
It's so sweet. I feel like we have these kind of bit characters that we're supposed to be laughing at, we're supposed to not care about, who actually are doing things with empathy and kindness and grace and love, and I'm team them.
I mean, I think we are supposed to be team Winston.
Oh, okay. Well, I am.
Let me tell you, something very dramatic happens at some point in the series, and we see Winston in some, let's just say, unexpected circumstances. Let's just say, sometimes in life, Mother Nature, you are thrust into a scenario you absolutely didn't plan that morning, and you may be having conversations you didn't expect to happen, and certain scenarios you did not expect to be in.
They're trapped in an elevator during an earthquake. You can't say. Which, I mean, I wouldn't want you to say anything, but here we are. We find out the identity of the Todd lookalike. It's Michael Sellers. Elizabeth falls into the same fallacy that everyone else seems to fall into, which is, oh, if two people look alike, they have the same personality. It's why people are constantly surprised when Liz and Jess are different, even though they look alike. And she sees Michael Sellers and is like, oh, I wonder if he's like Todd. This is truly inane behavior.
So basically, he goes to Big Mesa and he is on the volleyball team. So she knows that she's going to see him at the volleyball game on Friday or whatever it is. Then the twins get home and overhear Stephen and Ned having a conversation. And Ned is sort of trying to, I think, gently make some suggestions to Stephen. He says, why are you here? You've got more classes left. And he says, I have trouble staying in place. And then Ned says, oh, Steve, you can't get rid of ghosts by running away from them. And he says that compassionately. And then Stephen says, you don't understand. Trisha's not a ghost to me. She's real, and I want to keep her that way.
This was the part where I wrote in my notes, is this good advice? Must ask Pardo. So Ned is talking to Stephen, and he says, look, it's not possible that she's real. You can't keep her that way. Trisha's gone, and in time that will be easier to bear. Until the day comes when you can remember her without guilt or longing, and believe me, that day will come. You must try to deal with the fact that Trisha's life is over, and yours must go on. Let me tell you a story. When I was a junior in college, my best friend died in a car accident. I was devastated for weeks. I couldn't study, couldn't eat. Nothing seemed important. Finally, I realized that grieving wasn't helping my friend. He wouldn't have wanted that for me either. That was when I came out of my depression, but I never forgot him. When you were born, I named you Stephen after him. And this was the moment where I thought, Ned is trying to talk to Stephen about, like, how do we memorialize the loved ones that we've lost while still moving forward in our lives? And I think this is good advice, but I wrote, is this good advice? Must ask Pardo. And so I'd like to use my time now to ask Pardo.
I don't have all the answers, okay? Like, I don't know if it's good advice or not. I can tell you what I think. I hear some things in this that I do think are good advice and that I appreciate. The fact that he says, but I never forgot him and how I named you Stephen, I think that's beautiful. And I like that he's, in this case, saying you don't have to forget her. So I love that. You know, when he says grieving wasn't helping my friend, I think the thing I sort of take issue would be uncomfortable about is the sort of feeling like you have to delimit it in these strong ways. I think it's good to tell him that he should do it what he feels he can do, right? So if he feels he can go to his classes, then he certainly should do that and not feel guilty about it. And that he can continue to hold her memory and rebuild his life at the pace that is going to work for him. And he can still honor Trisha for the rest of his life. It's interesting in this book to see the different ways that people try to sort of support Stephen. What I have learned about supporting people that are grieving is that it's really not about directing their grief. It's not about trying to accelerate grief. It's not about having any kind of judgment on the grief or how it should be. It's just being present, and it's just witnessing and just holding space and just being a companion to people. And that's it.
And that was our segment called Ask a Deathspert.
Sexpert.
Deathspert.
No, it's sexpert.
No, Deathspert.
But there's a lot of the things that are really confusing and sometimes contradictory about the way they talk about that I find really confusing to parse. And Ned saying, like, dealing with the fact that her life is over and yours must go on, like, what does that entail?
It reinforces this idea of the central question of the book, which is, what do we do when love changes or dies? But it seems like they're unwilling to answer the question in any kind of realistic way. So they just kind of say, you either forget and move on, or you don't forget and you're stuck in the past.
Yeah, like what I really would have loved to see in this book would be something like something to honor Trisha.
Yeah.
Like, is there
a little bench? Plant a fucking tree. Like, why are we doing nothing for Trisha that actually could be helpful?
Yeah, just honestly, any action, whether symbolic, whether whatever, just something that shows he can continue to carry her with him as he builds more things around.
And like, we're doing this charity volleyball game. Why can't it be the Trisha Martin charity volleyball game? And we can do a scholarship for a girl from a bad family who's making good, you know?
You're right. And to support that, we know that it's not for some other dead kid, because then we would have known it was the Barton named, like, they didn't tell us it was dead person thing. So it's okay.
It's interesting because Jess tries to help Steven get better by dating Kara. And she does say, Steve, sometimes I think you don't even want to feel better. I think she has a really acute sense. She has it here. She had it in Crash Landing when Enid was like, what does Enid gain by recovering her movement? So
She also has an extremely psychologically acute observation, I think, later in the book when she tells Steve when he's seeing Kara and she's like, I think you don't want to be seen with her in public. You're worried that Betsy will judge you or people or something. You're worried what Betsy will think if she sees you. She says that later too, which is also true.
one other small point that reveals kind of their difference in psychology is after Steve is like clearly sad, Elizabeth says, I don't think we should intrude. He obviously wants to be left alone. He knows we're here for him, so I'm just not going to give him any advice unless he asks for it. And for me, it was just really telling that the way that Elizabeth thinks she can be there for someone or support someone is by giving them advice. And it's like, no, Steve doesn't need advice. He literally just needs someone to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, but TBH, like everyone, it's not just Liz who's being that way. Like Jess, Ned, no one's not being that way except Kara,
True.
right? Except who? Artie?
Oh, we can't even get to the Artie of it all. Although, well, when we get to Artie, we'll talk
Oh,
about it.
I know. He's stocky. He's stocky. He's stocky.
Wait.
Stocky. Stocky. Are we going to torture him for $5? Publicly humiliate him on a soccer field? Say he's a piece of shit? Cause him to have extremely traumatic experiences and finally get skinny and then finally he will have worth? Or will he just be recognized as human the way he is in his body?
He is the first character who is described as both stocky and good looking. He's described as good looking. Buckle your seatbelts.
Both things can be together at once.
It is, for the first time in Sweet Valley or in the human universe, someone can be stocky and good looking. What a beautiful moment for us and for humanity. We're at chapter 6. They're trying to get Steve to go to the dance. Jess wants to borrow Liz's new dress, but Liz says no because she secretly wants to wear it to look good for Michael Sellers.
The chapter ends. She goes to her friends. We don't want to be late for the dance. You certainly don't. A deep voice behind her said, I'm leaving soon myself. What time can I expect you? Elizabeth whirled around and looked right into the coffee brown eyes of Michael Sellers. Now we see from the jump, we see from the second he opens his mouth that he's different from Todd and that he's annoying. Okay, literally the first thing he does is so much more aggressive than the type of person Liz is usually attracted to. This is the kind of guy Jessica maybe, we learn later he's too egotistical and Jessica is annoyed by him too. But just the sort of like doing this power move of like, yeah, I'll see you there. What time are you going to be there? Kind of thing normally would turn Liz off. So we already see that she's going to be blinding herself a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Pardo just blithely jumped over Francine writing about sport. Her writing really sparkles. The volleyball game is very close. They have to play a best of 3. Big Mesa wins the first game of the match pretty easily because Liz does poorly at the beginning of the game because she's so focused on Michael and she just keeps messing up.
Which is literally her being what Todd used to do. Remember how Todd used to always get like sexually flustered over some sexual drama? He would like play bad basketball and then during halftime someone would have a conversation with him and then suddenly he'd play good. That's literally what happens in this.
That is actually literally what happens. Ken Matthews takes Liz aside and plays the role of the Todd counselor and says like, you used to be one of the best, what's going on? They decide that they're going to do a trick play.
Liz and Jess's like classic little trick move that they do because they're twins and they've been like doing since they were, it's like they keep it in their pocket, this like random trick. Like this was huge. You don't like?
I thought it was great. No.
I thought it was so fun.
So basically the trick play is Jess hits it to Liz. Liz looks like she's gonna like send it back to Jess for Jess to spike it. But at the last moment, Liz actually bumps it over the net and they don't even notice. And it works 3 times in a row. And what I really like about it is not only do I love a trick play, but I also love the idea that it plays on the lowered expectations they have of Liz because she was bad at the beginning of the game.
And the fact that they could do it 3 times, it's like because people are so baffled by seeing twins, it's like they're so thrown off.
Oh
It's
my
like
God,
that
of
this works
course.
three
Yeah.
times.
We end up winning the game. I have written in my notes, why are the stakes so high? We like never even find out what the charity is funding. Like, why would anybody care? But we do care.
I don't know, but I do just want to say I don't like Big Mesa, and not to stereotype, but like most of the kids who go there, I don't trust them.
I mean, this Michael is clearly a dick.
Michael is, I don't want to stereotype, but he's very representative of a lot of the characteristics of a lot of Big Mesa kids.
Um,
Okay, so then again, he like demonstrates being a dick from the jump where he's like, so why'd you play so shitty? It's like the
I
first
did
thing he
like that.
says.
Were you really playing badly in the beginning of the game, or were you just pretending to trick us? I thought it was funny. And then he weirdly says this, well, unlucky in sports, lucky in love, or something like that. Actually, I'm usually pretty good at both. And it's just like, shut up, you're a douche.
And then they're like, Steve, come with us to this dance at the caravan. And Steve's like, of course I'll come to your high school party.
Well, because Artie Western, Steve's old friend, a stocky boy with a friendly open face, who's a senior at Sweet Valley High, convinces him. So they all go together.
Wait, where did you see good looking? Is friendly and
It's
open
not
good
yet.
looking?
It's farther. We'll
Okay.
get there, baby.
All right.
We get again the idea that Kara is really empathetic. Now that Kara knew what it was like to lose someone that she loved, she sympathized with Steven. I know what it's like to have people disappear from your life, she thought. She missed her brother and father just as Steven missed Trisha. Perhaps they could cheer each other up, at least a little. Kara approaches Steve, and then Betsy also approaches Steve.
Yeah.
And then Steve just pulls Betsy aside without even thinking about Kara. She's there frozen in humiliation. She's about to run off when Artie says, would you like to dance? Kara was startled by Artie's invitation. Although Artie was a nice boy and good looking, Kara didn't think she should get involved with him. So Artie, a stocky and good looking boy, asked Kara out. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is dancing with Michael. He's just a complete douche.
But his body is so much like Todd's that when she closes her eyes and puts her head against his chest, you can almost imagine it's him.
We've all been there. Todd is rude about the refreshments.
Michael.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Wow.
A2?
Wow. Sorry. Michael is rude about the refreshments, even though Winston did the refreshments. And Elizabeth says, like, my friend did the food.
Everything he says and does is gross. He's bragging. He's just rude. He doesn't throw out his trash.
He says, maybe next time your friend should get some help with the food. And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, I've seen how Elizabeth delegates. They probably should have put more people on the food.
The thing is, I bet you, like, these big Mesa types, he's probably filthy rich, this guy. He probably thinks, oh, like some help, like get like catering or something. It's like, he probably thinks like just throw money at it is probably what he means by that. Because he's probably such a big Mesa type, if you know what I mean.
So kind of a Lila or a Bruce.
Thank God this Michael Sellers thing like doesn't go on for too long because I found it pretty painful.
Yeah.
Because like Elizabeth sort of awakes from her reverie when Winston asks if he can cut in on their dancing and Michael is very rude to her. And then she's like, you're being rude. And he's like, no jerk butts in on me. And then Elizabeth goes, the only jerk around here, Michael Sellers, is you. And so now she's over that.
Liz dances with Winston.
Liz basically sees Enid and wraps up the sort of storyline of that. Oh, Enid, he turned out to be obnoxious and blah, blah, blah.
And Enid says, but Liz, one good thing has come out of your experience with Michael. You've learned that you can't rush things and you can't expect to find another Todd.
Michael is dancing with Jessica and he's boring her with his egotistical monologue about football stories. And then she ditches him for Winston, which of course then is salt in his wound. And we have a little laugh at his expense. And then Jessica is going to Egbert's.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica makes explicit the parallel that we've been discussing between Elizabeth's grief and Stephen's. Because they're talking about Stephen. And Elizabeth says, when we got home, I saw him out on the patio with Betsy reminiscing about Trisha. You know, Jess, I'm beginning to think you're right. Perhaps he is living too much in the past. And what about you? Jessica asked. Was being in Michael Sellers' arms like a trip back in time?
Really great.
Liz tells Jess that she's going to have a friendly tennis game with John Pfeiffer. Not necessarily romantic, but, you know, she's now, I think, going to start making an effort to kind of do a little more socially with various folks. Yeah, so basically Artie is trying to clear with Steven that he's dating Kara, and Steven's like, it's okay, but like he's getting annoyed by like talking about it kind of thing. And then, thank God, he gets to end his phone call with Artie because Guido's pizza has arrived.
Oh yeah. Oh, I want this. Did you clock what they ordered?
Of course.
Half pepperoni, half sausage.
Of course, we have the delicious mouth-watering aroma.
Gosh. Jess keeps talking about Kara, and that's when Jess says her famous line, okay, but remember, Kara's got one advantage over Trisha. She's alive. What was your take on that? Is that brutal or fair? Or both?
I think it's brutal. I think he should have as much time as he needs to process Trisha's loss, and he doesn't need to rush into dating. In the book, I think we're supposed to see it as kind because it sort of seemed to be like slapping him in the face in terms of like acceptance. In reality, I don't think this is helpful. What do you think?
I thought in the book we're supposed to see it as brutal, not kind.
Oh, I think we're supposed to see it as kind because in the next section we see him processing it and like deciding that it's true, and then he calls Kara to talk, and that sort of triggers him to start resolving the relationship with Kara. So I think we're supposed to see it as like brutal but effective and originating in kindness and then having the desired effect. But Elizabeth, I think, is supposed to represent the initial reaction of that's so rude.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, then I guess then I don't know how I feel. I think no one needs brutal honesty ever. I think even if it is brutal and kind, like we need to find a way to be kind to each other without being brutal.
Even just the framing of it is like her having an advantage over her frames them as in competition. Like,
yeah.
I don't like that part of it, but I get what she's going for.
It's another showdown. I mean, Trish is a horse who doesn't know she's in a race. Kara does know she's in a race. Kara is a horse who knows she's in a race.
Literally.
He goes on a date with Kara. They have a picnic at the zoo. It's very cute. We see Kara's clear change because she doesn't gossip at all about dating Steven and won't even talk about it with Jessica or Elizabeth.
But then, I think a thing we're supposed to notice is that he's now getting somewhere, it seems like, in terms of he's like, okay, I can go pursue this thing with Kara, but she asks him to come to a pool party, well, a splash party. I don't know what that means at Bruce Patman's, but Steven says he wants to have a picnic and be alone. So I think he's not yet ready to be seen with her in public. So he's still working through that, which really pissed me off.
I mean, he's not entitled to not want to go to a splash party?
No, but Robert, of course he's entitled, like, if not for the other context, but like we then learn that he's a little bit in denial right now because he's telling himself he's ready, but he's not, because then he gets triggered at the restaurant, remember?
Of course. I want to just kind of lovingly push back, and I think one of my kind of favorite scholars in this space talks about how death is a process, grieving is a process, it's not linear, and like, aren't we just watching kind of Steven grapple with those things and figure out like what feels right, what feels wrong? It just feels like it's a little bit more growth oriented than I'm afraid to be seen with you, I'm a silly little wanker or what have you.
Then why make that be the plot? Why then not just have them go on a beautiful picnic rather than her suggest, let's go to this party, and he says, no, let's do the picnic. If it wasn't meaningful, I don't think we would need that. He has consistently treated Kara in this dismissive and instrumental way. He has consistently used her and been insensitive to her feelings or the impact of his behavior on her. He's been callous, and I think he's been reckless, because the fact that he's already done this to her multiple times and then re-engages, even when they're on the phone at the end, she has to force him to admit it. She's like, are you sure? I can't compete with a ghost. And he's like, no, I'm ready. And she's like, okay, but like, you're actually not, right? And he's like, actually, yeah, you're right. I'm not, sorry. Like, she literally, and it's like, that is not fair. And I don't think it's adequately acknowledged his mistreatment of her. Like, I'm sorry, but I hate Steven. Like, I at once have compassion for him, but I absolutely find his treatment of her in several books inexcusable.
I agree with all of that. So boring. Jess goes to Winston. She like
fried chicken, pasta salad, chocolate cake.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Okay, me neither.
She's snooping around Winston's house. She runs into Marty and she says, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Like, I'd love to talk more about your project. And he's like, sure, come over Saturday and I'll show you the concert and we can talk about it.
Like it's basically like we basically know from the beginning, like
Yeah.
something's funky gonna happen of not what Jessica thought. So it starts with she overhears Alice talking. It's like, oh, you have a famous brother. He's in town. Okay. And then Winston's like, yeah, my famous uncle's coming or whatever. My uncle's coming. And then it's like, oh, your uncle. And then she's like, oh, you're really big at your job, right? He's like, yeah, big at job. And they never say what the job is. And then she's like, I'd love to talk to you about your big deal job. And he's like, great, let's set up a time to talk about my job. So then that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Stephen and Kara have a nice picnic, fried chicken, pasta salad, and chocolate cake. And he is rude to her about the fact that she bought the chicken and pasta salad. She made the cake from scratch. By the way, he asked her out in the first place. Then she had to make all the food. And then he's mad at her that some of it was store-bought. She spent her money on this. Fuck you, Stephen. Go rot in hell. I hate you. I hate Stephen. I hate Stephen. Do I hate Stephen more than Ned? No, I hate Ned more.
Yeah,
Stephen's a close second.
I
hate Stephen probably more than I hate Bruce, and Bruce is a rapist. Okay.
Allegedly. Although I guess we read the books, so it's not alleged.
We saw it with our eyes.
Yeah. Stephen keeps going on dates with Kara, but there hasn't been the least bit of romance in them. He takes her out for her birthday. But again, she plans the whole thing, which I guess works only because we need the birthday to be at that special restaurant, and Stephen would never pick that special restaurant. But it is really weird that she makes the plans for her own special birthday dinner. He gets her a birthday present. The card on it says, quote, happy birthday to someone nice, which is truly, truly, truly unhinged. And at that point, Kara should have been like, I think we're done here. Happy birthday to someone nice?
So weird.
So, I mean, not just weird, like pathological. Steve finds out that their reservations are at the Valley Inn. Instead of having an honest conversation and saying, look, that feels a little uncomfortable to me. The last time I went to the Valley Inn was my last date with Trisha, my late girlfriend, Trisha.
And they used to dance there to her favorite old song, Always, which I was like, what is that song? It's obviously not the Bon Jovi song.
No, it's not. I Googled around, couldn't find anything.
Okay.
So they're at dinner. Things seem to be going okay. They order the same thing, prime rib, tossed green salad, and a baked potato. I have to let you know that if I am on a date with someone, I would never order the same thing they ordered.
What if it's a prefix?
Well, yeah, but this is not a prefix. If it's a prefix, I don't have a choice. It's fix.
I'm trying to tell myself a story. I don't know.
This is not a prefix. They decided to have. There are large white dinner menus. Doesn't scream prefix to me.
All right, then it's like, well, guess everything's gonna be good. And Stephen got over being sort of triggered, and they're gonna end up having a nice night with their prime rib. No,
Oh, perfect.
Because they get up to do a little dance, and the song comes on, the special song that Trisha loves so much, Always. And Stephen basically has a panic attack, and he runs out and leaves her there, and she has to find money, take a cab home.
No, he leaves her money, which I thought was really, really weird.
He leaves money for the meal. He leaves money for the meal.
We don't know exactly.
Listen, the waiter had already left the check. So Kara had only to pay with the money Stephen had left, gather her things, and leave. And then she called a taxi. I assume he left the money for the check.
Either way, this is really making me grapple with having compassion for someone who has suffered a great loss and still holding them accountable for their behavior. Because it's very hard for me, because I wanted to be like, look, he's going through it. But like, yeah, he's being terrible. You cannot treat another human being this way for the 50th time.
And by the way, Kara is in the midst of one of the most painful experiences of her life. Her parents have divorced. Her father has literally abandoned her family and taken the brother with. Okay, that's big.
It's huge.
Like, literally no one asks her a question about it.
Not a single question.
Let alone do we get a thought from her.
Meanwhile, I mean, we do get thoughts from her, but only insofar as her own loss has helped her understand Stephen's loss better. And it's like, well, yeah, she's not just a rehabilitation center for Stephen.
Exactly. Her experience is like, the only point of it is so that she can like help Stephen and like be seen as serious by him. Fuck him.
Gross.
Okay.
He then calls her that night, and it's just like so fucked up.
And then he goes, the other reason I don't think he left her cash is because he goes, did you get home all right? And she's like, yes, I called a cab. So he didn't know she was going to call a cab. He didn't know how she was going to get home. In
my story, he's asking because he left her cash for the cab. And he's like, oh, did you get home all right with my money?
I know. I don't think he did.
Yeah. So we can agree to hate each other.
All right, then he says he wants to make it up to her. She says, I like you very much, but you're tied to Trisha in a way that I think is unhealthy for any relationship of ours. Tell me the truth, Steve. You don't feel free to see other girls, do you? Not really, he admitted. I'm sorry for that, Stephen, I am, but I can't compete with a ghost. And the truth is, I don't even want to. And then again, he is in denial of where he's at. He goes, Kara, I wish I could have one more chance. I'd like to help you get through this, she says. Are you ready for me to do that? Stephen knew it was important to give her an honest answer. And he says, I wish I were, but you're not. No, I'm not. But what's interesting about this is the book could have ended here. And it's like, so he's not ready to date. But it's like, no, that what ends up happening is it's like, we learned that it's like the final barrier to him dating her isn't because of like he's still processing through his own grief, which would be normal and maybe should have been this book. But it's that like Betsy is guilting him. So the way this thing gets resolved is now Betsy's going to let him free, quote unquote. It's like, that's annoying.
It's
Like
annoying.
those shouldn't be conflated. Those shouldn't be conflated. Like those are separate things. And like him not being ready to date is valid in and of itself. And like that could have happened without being blackmailed by Beth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the other thing that really bothers me is I'd like to help you get through this. Are you ready for me to do that? Which is
Right.
like so gross. She's not like, I really like you.
And why should she have to bear that? It's like if he said yes, it's like so she's gonna bear that burden. I don't know. Ugh.
Gross.
Now finally we need to
Jessica
have our meeting with Marty.
Jessica calls Winston's house to find out when um people will be around. Winston does the famous Waylon Jennings and Madam joke. Egbert summer home, summer not. The of course the Waylon Flowers and Madam joke is these are my summer diamonds, summer not. I like that. Little queer history coming from Winston.
Okay. Wonderful.
Jess goes over to Marty. The big reveal. He takes out a big binder. It's about trash.
Wait, it's funny. I'm sorry, but it is. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. So she finds Marty. He's in the backyard on a lounge chair, as you would say.
Chaise longue.
He's leafing through a thick volume that she thinks to herself, that must be the script. He's like, how are you? And she's putting on all her charm. I couldn't be better. And he's like, here's that project I told you about. She's like, I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited to read it. And he's like, really? I can't believe you'd be interested to read all this. And she goes, well, why don't you just tell me the story? And he's like, ha ha ha, that's such a funny joke. Tell you the story. She's like, why? Why is it funny? And I think Jessica's starting to get a little bit of a indication that maybe Marty is maybe not the brother that we maybe thought Marty was. And Marty says, let's see, I think I can do that. This is the story of a man who wants to find the best routes to move garbage out of Los Angeles. Garbage, Jessica said weakly. Garbage isn't a topic with much appeal, is it? Probably not, but we're lucky we like it, aren't we? He responded, giving her a little wink. So it turns out Marty absolutely is a civil engineer who is sorting out garbage.
Which is a valuable and important job that we need and we should respect and honor. And the book plays it for a joke and plays Marty for a fool. And like, cool, but we need trash dealt with. And there should be honor and dignity in doing that job. So justice for Marty.
I agree, but I was happy that she stayed the rest of the thing
Yeah.
to listen to him talk about it just because she felt like she couldn't get out. So maybe she did learn something that I told myself maybe she'll reflect on later and decide is actually interesting because it is. Okay, Liz talks to Betsy, says Trisha would not want Stephen to be so sad. Betsy says, okay. Then, we got to end with a stunt. Okay? Can't have just a conversation. We got to have a bit of a stunt.
It's such a boring stunt.
You want to take us out?
I mean,
Kara, okay. Kara and Stephen both show up at some lawn. They see Teddy riding around on a bike. They're like, what? I got a note that my mom said I got to be here at the lawn. He's like, I got a note. My mom said I got to be here at this lawn. And they're like, why did someone both write us a note, tell us to come to this lawn? And then Teddy calls his kid, gives them a package. And the package has two portraits beautifully sketched. And of course, we know now it's from Betsy. And one is a portrait of Kara and one is a portrait of Stephen. And along with it is a letter. Betsy wrote a nice note that said, you two should find love with each other. You have my blessing. Goodbye. Not goodbye, but
it is a sweet note. A wonderful person like you should be looking towards his future, not his past. You made my sister so happy while she was alive. Now it's time for you to bring your kindness and affection to someone else. Do what Trish wanted, Steve. Embrace life and all the beautiful things it has to offer. If you take that note outside of the context of date another woman, it's a very sweet note.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the cafeteria. We've got another Winston Egbert prank. This one isn't even food related. It's just stacking books and using them like dominoes?
ADD. I told you.
BORING. I told you. Meanwhile, Emily Mayer is sitting there quietly, her eyes downcast. Is she potentially also a Jew? Mayer?
Oh, I was thinking Marty might be a Jew, the film director, Marty, who's not a film director, but Emily Mayer could go either way.
Okay. Emily Mayer sat quietly, her eyes downcast. Elizabeth glanced up at her once or twice with a worried look. Jessica had told her about Emily's problems at home, and the poor girl looked as if she was at the breaking point. Hey, Emily, Guy Chesney called out from the other side of the table. Can the droids practice at your house tonight? I don't think so, she stammered. Then she got up suddenly, gathered her books, and left the table in a rush. Elizabeth followed Emily out of the cafeteria and into the ladies' room across the hall. Emily was standing alone by the sink, sobbing into a paper towel. Emily? Elizabeth, I just want to be alone right now. What's wrong? Is there anything I can do to help? Nobody can help. My own father wants to send me away from Sweet Valley. Oh, Emily, I'm sure you're wrong. No, I heard him talking to my stepmother. He said it was time to think about sending me to boarding school. And of course, Karen agreed. Maybe they think you're unhappy at home. It's more like they're unhappy having me around. Oh, Elizabeth, what am I going to do? I love Sweet Valley. I don't ever want to leave. Will Emily be forced to go to boarding school? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 25, Nowhere to Run, coming next month. Now, listeners, we will not find that out next month because we will, of course, be reading the next special edition. But I can say, I don't care. Go to boarding school or not, it doesn't matter. Like, people are living and dying here, Emily. We don't care if you go to boarding school.
Any thoughts or feelings about what might happen on a very, very special Christmas?
None at all. I hope they get presents. I hope Winston dresses up like Santa. I hope they don't go on a trip. I hope they have Christmas in Sweet Valley, but maybe they go to Paris or somewhere.
That's a different one.
Oh, sorry.
Special summer or something. Special spring break. Literally, one of them. There's one where they go to Paris. The cover of it, well, I won't tell you. The cover of it is them looking at pamphlet. It says France.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's amazing. No, the special edition. All I'm gonna say is,
just don't say anything then.
All I'm gonna say is it's not. And I'm gonna say one thing, which is it's not necessarily the exact same vibe of what was Perfect Summer.
Okay, good.
They're not necessarily on bicycles and Mr. Collins is there. It's not necessarily that.
Okay.
Necessarily something may happen. From a perspective of plot, something may happen that may make you say, I did not necessarily expect this going into this book. And that's all I'm going to say.
Wow. How terrifying.
Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.